Redesigning your space can have a huge impact, and when it's your home, it can dramatically improve your life and in ways that you may not have anticipated, especially if your design is not purposeful or intentional. And this video is going to give you a fresh take and a bit maybe offbeat, unusual perspective on how you can make an impact on your life through design. Here on my channel, we talk about home design, and in this conversation, we are talking about your space and how it relates to your personal brand. We all have a personal brand, and our personal brand has a huge impact on who our friends are, and more importantly, how they treat us, our career path and the success that we have in careers, and even things like what tasks we get given to do at the school PTA. Our homes and home workspaces are part of our physical representation of our brand, and they can indicate to others what we're all about. Being able to literally read the room and understand as a reflection of who you are, how relatable, aspirational, and desirable you are is something we are all able to do. Maybe it's more on a subconscious level, but we can all do that. And in this conversation, we're going to uncover some revealing insights that will help you to create your space in a more intentional way so that other people will understand you better, and you'll be able to enjoy greater connection with others and achieve more of what you want in life. So I'm really delighted today, and it's going to be a really interesting conversation to have with Rebecca Watson, who runs a branding agency. She's got years of experience in branding and creating graphics for some really well-known brands. And she's based in Cumbria, UK, runs a women in business community called the Establish Her Circle. And we're both prepared today. Her favourite drink is Yorkshire tea, and she's partial to a Kit Kat from time to time. I've got my cuppa ready, sadly, no chocolate biscuits. But hi, Rebecca, it's lovely to have you here.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It makes me feel quite old when you say like you've got years of experience, but I do. Like I'm just about to turn 40, and I feel as if, yeah, I'm coming into that time where it's like, yeah, I do have a lot of experience actually. So no, it's exciting to be here.
It is a scary one. I used to not dye my hair deliberately, so I had the grey hair showing so people could tell, and now I'm sort of edging closer towards that big 5. And people often say, oh, you don't look like it.
No.
But yeah, those decades of experience are there.
Yeah, absolutely, which is a good thing, so we're going to embrace it.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe stop dyeing the hair. So is there anything more that you'd like to say about what our viewers can expect from this conversation, or anything more that I missed out in your introduction?
No, I think everything sounds, great. I mean, when it comes to like interiors and things like that, it's something which, before this call, I was like, what is in my background that people can see? Like, what are they going to judge me on? And I think that's kind of what it comes down to, like how we what people perceive of us and what we perceive for ourselves. And I noticed that I've only half finished repainting this wall, so don't take my interior design advice for take Jane's advice. I can do the branding, I just can't do the actual interior part.
Oh yeah, my home office is like, it's currently in another phase of about to be redone.
Yeah, exactly.
so don't do what I do as I say.
A state of flux is what I like to call it. But we have busy lives. It can't be perfect all the time, and that's exactly one of the key things. So
it's a bit like being the cobbler with no shoes.
Yes, absolutely. We'll go with that.
Yeah, I'm currently in experimentation phase. I bought myself a walking pad, so I have this very interesting setup at the moment with a standing setup, but it's all very improvised, experimental at the moment.
I like that.
And so all of this we're all working from our home offices, so that our home workspace has a direct impact on our careers, and like, you know, what people see of us, and all of that is clearly a branding thing. But in terms of branding, then, what is the purpose of branding? How can it be used strategically, and what does that do for a business?
Yeah, so I mean, branding, I think it's Seth Godin that says that branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So, which is quite cool because we're talking about interior design. So it is kind of things like your reputation, what people say about you, their opinion of you, your values as a brand. And that all feeds into the interiors, into the visual things that you use to represent as yourself, you know, outward facing as well as inward facing as well. So yeah, it's also things like the way that you speak, the way that you write. It kind of comes under that umbrella of, again, reputation and how you want to be perceived by the world.
So it comes with like all things like personality and things like that can come into it as well.
Exactly. It's really, sometimes it feels intangible because quite often people think that branding is just the visuals, but it's also, you know, the story of your business, the story of your brand, and everything comes together under this little brand umbrella. And then the visuals kind of come a little bit later, but visuals is normally the part of branding that I deal with, you know, the most. But the strategy as well comes into it. It feeds into so many decisions that you make as well. You know, where you want to market your business, how you want to market it, and who you're marketing to, essentially. So yeah, there's lots that goes into it.
And how then does a personal brand compare to a business brand? Are they quite similar, or are they very different?
Yeah, so a personal brand, I mean, I would recognize a personal brand as, for example, someone that's just themselves in their business. So for example, before I had an agency, I was a personal brand because I didn't really have anyone that worked with me, whereas I do now. So they're part of the brand as well. So it's no longer personal or as personal as it was. But it's very similar because it's how you want to be perceived. It's how you want to be sort of seen in the world and what you represent. And it's having that sort of control over that as well. But for personal brands, it tends to be very much things like, you know, what you wear, what kind of glasses you have, what colour your hair's dyed and things like that. It's all very, you know, the visuals of you as a person, as well as the way that, you know, things like a logo or a website and how that looks. It's also you and how you look as well. And it feels a little bit icky sometimes because you're kind of like, oh, I don't want to be judged for how I dress, and I don't want to be judged for, you know, my hair and stuff like that. But I would say that it's very important to think about all of those things when it comes to your personal brand, but also, you know, within an organization, each of those people also is part of that brand. So it feeds into bigger businesses as well. And as I said before, it kind of helps you make decisions about everything from what you wear, what you say, the language that you use, and the visuals that you put out into the world. So kind of crosses over a little bit.
But there's a really good book. I'm not sure if it's called Women Who Brand or something like that. It's a really good book about by a branding expert who's talking specifically about two women who are interested in promoting their careers and getting, you know, past that glass ceiling, and how they can use personal branding to achieve greater success in their career. And she talks quite a bit about how you dress and the sort of conversations you have and things like that.
Yeah, it feels, you know, in some ways it makes people feel a little bit inauthentic sometimes. I think that it's got to be true to you, not just as a business, but yourself as well. you know, I went through a bit of a phase myself where I was like, who am I as a business? Like, what do I wear? I never really considered that before. But when you go out networking, and especially now, when I started my business like 10 years ago, you know, Facebook was a thing, but it was very rare that I did a video or spoke to the camera. Whereas now we do that all of the time, and we're on Zoom all of the time and things like that. So I think now it feels more relevant. Back then it didn't feel as relevant. So it's taken that progression of sort of, you know, the internet and how that all works now. We're much more online, to make me realize personally that I need to consider more about, you know, what I wear and all of that stuff as well. But it feels frivolous at the same time, because I feel as though I'm still very much like, you know, a child of the 2000s, like 90s, 2000s, where, you know, we dressed however we wanted to dress with no judgment, if that makes sense. But there's much more judgment out there. So it's like, you want to rebel against it, but equally it's very important. So having that balance is also important as well.
I think in the world we live in now, with social media and all these likes and all the filters and everything, so it seems to me as though how you look has become ever more important in terms of how we value ourselves and how others see us. And, you know, if you're really like, if you got all the likes on your latest Instagram, which I avoid Instagram. I have got an Instagram account. You can follow me there if you like, but you won't see very much.
I did tag you in a story today saying that I was doing a chat with you, and I was like, is she on Instagram? You are. So I did tag you.
I'm kind of everywhere, but in terms of actually where I'm actually at, mostly YouTube is my place, really.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, and now as well, especially after 2020 and the glorious time that we had with COVID, and everybody,
your minds forever.
And everybody now, well, not everybody, but many of us now working from home.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been working from home since 2009, so
awesome. Yeah, I mean,
bit longer for us. So we were kind of already there and used to it by the time 2020 came. But for a huge amount more people now, the space that we have behind us is part of our, we're representing businesses if we're employees, like bigger companies. We're also, like, if we work for ourselves, we're representing our own business. And so what people see of us on a screen, but also the space around us, can have an impact in terms of how people consider you. And, you know, you can get all those graphic backdrops, can't you?
I've seen that. And I do sometimes create them for clients and things, but it's one of these things where I'm always a little bit like, you know, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be, you know, depending on your business, really. I don't think people pay that much attention to it, but equally I think that having a space that does represent you as a business is really important. Like, even little things like, I know it sounds really weird, but a lot of my clients are in the spiritual sort of realm. They like to, you know, crystals and Reiki and things like that. And I actually don't know sometimes why I attract those types of people, because I've got a crystal on my desk and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say that I'm super into it. But equally, I remember I had a crystal in there. I used to have some on there. And one of the clients that I signed up, she said, oh, the reason I decided on you is because I saw in the background that you had a crystal. And I thought, and she doesn't even do anything with crystals like in her work. She does systems and, you know, professional services. I had no idea that she had anything in, you know, she liked crystals, but I had that in the background, not even thinking about, you know, but I like having crystals. And she chose me because of that, as well as obviously being a good designer, and we had a good relationship. But just the little things like that can make a tiny thing can make a huge difference to someone's decision about whether they want to work with you or not. And I just think that when it comes to like interiors and things like that, it is really important. So yeah, just made me think like, oh yeah, maybe I do need to jazz up my like surroundings a little bit more. So
I think that what you just pointed out, having little items or little things that people can see, or it could be big things. It doesn't have to be a little thing. Could be a huge plant.
Yeah.
It's actually taking over the room. But other people can see things that are personal, little bits of personality that they can connect with and recognize as relatable or something that they appreciate too. And that's where, when we're meeting people in real life, there are, maybe it's kind of, some of these things happen a bit more naturally, but when it's across a screen, those little things point, you know, you can't see your shoes, for example. You can't see
exactly.
There's lots that you can't see, but if you've got little things behind you that other people can then relate to and pick up on, that can reflect what your interests are and all of those things. So what, in terms of that, then, in terms of figuring out like what's your brand, I was interested to know if there are any like key questions that you start asking your clients about to sort of get some idea of what is their brand, and that will help you then to kind of identify, you know, what sort of things you might want to have in your Zoom backdrop, or what kind of color clothes you want to wear, things like that.
So would this be for people who don't have a business, or people who do have a business and they work from home, or do you want me to do both?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but would it be different?
Not massively. I think with people who are in business, so just say you were brand, you know, like doing the interior of your office, for example, you would probably think a little bit more carefully about the things that you have out in terms of like decor and things like that, because, for example, this wall behind me is really dark because I think the contrast is good for when you are on a video and things like that. But generally in my home, I don't have an awful lot of colour on the walls, because I like to add things that are colourful that I can then change around. So part of my brand as a person is that I love colour, but I'm not set on a certain style, a certain vibe. Like, I'm very eclectic when it comes to interiors and everything. Clothing, everything. I just wear what I want to wear. And I think that comes from being a creative person, artistic and things like that. But for someone who wants to give off the vibe that, you know, they're very put together, they're very, I don't know, classic or traditional, their choices would be very different from mine. So when I'm asking clients about, you know, when we start a branding project, it very much comes down to, you know, first and foremost, who are they as a business? If it's a personal brand, it's very much who are they as a person and what their business does for others. I'd be looking at things like what their values are, the beliefs that they have about their business, and also the beliefs and values of the people they want to attract, because essentially it's like a two-way street. We're putting things out and we have control of that, but we also want to attract people, and the way we have control of that is through branding and through visuals and the things that we put out there. So I'd be looking at those types of things and really just get into the finer detail as to what that would look like visually. I always like to ask clients if there's anything that they want me to avoid, or there's something that they just really don't like, or if there's something that they love that they want to incorporate in their branding that they're desperate to have. So, you know, I can remember working with a client, she loves hot pink. And I was a little bit like, okay, so you're an accountancy firm, you love hot pink. However, it was appropriate for her to have that because she, you know, she does work with women. It's very much like a female orientated business. So it was appropriate for that. Now, if it wasn't the case, I might treat that a little bit differently and maybe not have pink. But then again, it's a very metrosexual world. You know, pink is much more accepted. So that's kind of, you know, where I would look at what they want as well. I like clients sometimes to send me a Pinterest board or whatever, if there's anything they particularly, you know, want to incorporate. Things like, is there any specific causes that they really champion? So, for example, when it comes to interiors, you know, maybe they want really eco-friendly paint or recycled, I don't know, furniture, or, you know, whatever. If that's important to them and that gives off the right impression to their, you know, friends and family that they're really eco-conscious, then obviously we'd incorporate factors such as that. And I guess I'm trying to think of anything else that I would ask that would kind of lead into that. But yeah, essentially those are the main things that I'd be looking at in terms of their branding, and I guess the purpose as well would be really important, especially for interiors, but also for the branding generally. You know, where are they going to be advertising? What is the, you know, do they have packaging? Do they have interiors? Do they have, you know, printed, or are they more online? And when it comes to interiors, it would be kind of, what is the purpose of each room? And it's similar to exactly what you do as a job, you know, coming up with choices that are appropriate for the room type and the uses of it and the vibe that they're going for and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of roughly what I would be looking at.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot of it. Well, it's to be expected, isn't it? We both come at design from slightly different perspective, looking at slightly different things, but a lot of those similar, like, what do you love, what do you loathe, those sorts of questions are really crucial when you're looking at designing something for somebody. You need to know quite a lot of information.
Yeah, it's quite a personal thing as well. I think, you know, I tend to, because it is so personal, you really have to relate well to the person that is helping you with your branding, with your interiors and things like that. Because if you don't, and you don't have that sort of rapport, it's quite difficult for them to get the answers out of you that you know, you need to feel comfortable as well. So it helps to kind of have that, yeah, easygoing sort of relationship as well. Like, pick someone that's nice and pick someone that's gonna be nice to work with, because it is such a personal thing. So yeah,
I mean, it's definitely true in terms of home design and that kind of personal environment. There's a lot of personal investment. It's quite high stakes, really, and that is but being able to feel comfortable about telling. I mean, I hear so many very personal pieces of information from clients about things that they want to overcome, where it's they couldn't talk about those things if they didn't feel comfortable. I remember one client in particular, he snored and she they were I don't know if they were both not from the UK or just she was not from the UK, but they often had family members come from abroad and come and stay for like several weeks at a time. And she wanted to make sure that when they had people staying over, that she was seen to be coming out of their joint bedroom in the morning, so there was no doubts or worries that there was anything wrong with their relationship. But she also wanted to have a space off their bedroom where she could escape to sleep in quiet if she needed to. So these kind of
that is very personal, isn't it?
Yeah,
won't quite get to that level of personal with clients generally, but you know, there are sometimes things that they want to share with me, or if, especially in my membership, if they're having like difficulties or whatever, then obviously that's okay. But generally, you know, branding, even in personal branding, it doesn't tend to get that deep, if that makes sense. It tends to be very surface level, because let's face it, even if you're a personal brand, it's always my advice not to not to be so out there that you kind of put like polarizing people and feel, and you're not kind of, you know, airing your dirty laundry, so to speak. You know, it's important to still have that, as long as it's appropriate for your business, but that professional outlook as well. Even though it is a personal brand, it's, you've got to have those boundaries too.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So there's like this balance between, because there's a lot of talk about be authentic, show your vulnerabilities, and but then that sort of balancing that off with actually a professional, you know, like if you're working from home, you don't want your dirty laundry in a pile behind you.
Exactly. And you know, I'm a mum, and I know you are too, so you know, my daughter, especially now, she's very private. Like, she doesn't want me to share pictures. Generally, I'll ask her, is it okay if I put this on Facebook or whatever? And she's like, usually no. So now it's very much like, I've actually purposefully turned my desk against this wall. It used to face the other way, and if someone walked in, you could see them and things like, not really, but you know, if my daughter wanted something, she kind of would appear, and that was fine. I didn't mind that personally, but now she is older. She doesn't want people to see her face on a Zoom video. It depends what it is, but it's little things like that when it's especially your home, the other people in the home as well, and how they want to be perceived, and also what the uses of their, you know, a family room, for example, would be very different to an office. So yeah, it kind of depends on the use as well, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a crucial thing when I'm helping people design their home workspace.
Yeah.
Actually looking at whereabouts in the house is your workspace located.
Yeah,
is like the number one, very first decision.
Mine used to be in the kitchen, on the kitchen table when I first started.
Same.
And I sometimes share like pictures, and it reminds me of how far I've come, because I shared a picture of my little girl. She was a sort of 1-year-old in her high chair. My computer's on the desk. I'm trying to feed her while I'm doing but that's not me anymore, you know. So I've had to change everything to fit that new identity of me as a brand as well, because I'm no longer a mum of a tiny toddler, just about making it in business. That it's much more professional now. You know, I've got a team, and it has to evolve with you as well. And that's one thing I would say about branding, whether it's personal or businesses. We try and make it last as long as we can, because it is an investment when someone comes to work with me. And I always say, you know, if they're really keen on a particular trend, or they've seen something they like, I'm always very cautious about that, because, and it's the same with interiors, you've spent a lot of money on the interior, and it has to last for a good while, unless you're loaded and you can do it all the time. That's fair enough. But generally people want it to last the longevity of a good amount of time. So I'm always really careful about like trends as well, just to make sure that we're not just choosing it because it's trendy. It really is associated with your business and your brand, and it's perfect for you, and not because you've seen an influencer do it. Like when everyone started painting their houses grey, and I was like, everyone's got the same coloured house now, and all the, like when baby stuff's just beige, I'm kind of like, where's the colour for these children? But that's, you know, each to their own at the same time. So it's kind of a balance, isn't it, between trendy and uniquely you.
Yeah,
it's really tricky though.
Yeah, I think because I come from the architecture side, so I'm not an interior designer. I deal with interiors, but I'm much more about the structure of the space.
Yes.
And architecture is, you know, we study like classical Greek temples and stuff like that. So really thinking about permanence and long-term and durability, maintenance, so all of that sort of thing. And so that's where I fall out personally with interior design, where it is a lot of it is trends. A lot of the home design magazines aren't really about architecture. They're much more about home design, and they're much more about, you know, oh, is it a high gloss kitchen this year, or is it a blue, or is it a sage green?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and it goes in this like kind of a cycle, and that's all to do with product sales.
Yes,
really, and that's what it is. And I think it's really important to sort of get that classic, or what's classic to you, because
yeah.
I love looking back at sofa fashion as well. I love looking back and taking inspiration from well, I love Bridget Bardot, and
Yeah.
so they're taking bits of inspiration from like 60s and 70s and bringing that through, and you know, different kind of periods. And that, to me, the same with architecture, like looking at there's the case study houses in California. I don't know if that's very architectural reference.
It's very niche, Jane.
I mean, it's a place I'd love to go and visit, California, and do a case study house tour, which is like such a nerdy architectural
place
thing to do.
It's San Francisco I'm thinking of, that has those weird houses that are on hills, and like they've got like lifts inside that go sort of up like the house and stuff. I always think they're really cool. But
there's a classic one that you probably will have seen, which is I think it's Los Angeles, but I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember. And it's basically on a cliff face. There's a pool, and there's a bit of this house that kind of juts out over the cliff face. It's all glass all the way around. There's beautiful photographs. I'm just reading. Julius Schulman was the photographer, very, very famous photographer, architectural photographer, who photographed a lot of these case study houses.
Wow.
And this particular house, you can see all the street lights twinkling down in the background. And you've got this just a stunning house. I'd love to go and visit in real life, because the thing about architecture is you get these amazing photographs, but then it's a space to be experienced. And I think that experiencing space is kind of where you kind of get a different level of branding as well, because branding is about people's experience, isn't it? People's experience of you as a business, of you as a person, and then the experience of a space is a different kind of just a different level. I mean, how do you deal with that sort of experience for people?
Well, we have a bit of a list called like brand touch points, which is kind of a list of things that a business might need to think about when it comes to sort of user experience of their brand. And that can go all the way into interiors, even things like the smell of the space, and how, you know, the lighting, the colors that they use, the furniture and things like that, because it's all very, you know, like a sensual experience at the end of the day. Branding isn't just what we see, it's just everything that we experience. So, you know, even things like how you talk to clients and the type of voice that you use and things like that. Like, I always think of that. There's a Friends episode where Phoebe works in this chain of massage places, and everyone speaks like this, and she's like, do we all have to speak like this? And it's kind of like a little bit robotic because it's a chain, but that is an example of how even the tone of voice that people use is reflective of the branding. So yeah, when it comes to interiors, it could be anything from how the carpet feels under your feet to the products that you use in the bathroom and things like that. So there's lots that can come into it, and certainly for quite a lot of my clients who have spaces, I've helped them with those decisions as well. Yeah, so Yeah.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it, the touch points. And that the smell thing reminds you of Subway. If you go past a Subway, they're always pumping that weird smell out.
Herby smell.
Herby bread smell, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I did read somewhere that the bakeries used to pump out the smell of like fresh bread. And like Lush, for example, they always have their doors like wide open, and when you walk past, you always smell the overpowering smell of.
I think that's maybe why they have to have their doors wide open, because if they kept it closed.
Because it is very strong. But yeah, things like the scent that you have in your space, it's all very important, and it sort of evokes the senses, which a successful brand should do. It does need to evoke feelings, and with that comes emotions, and like nostalgia, for example, is really important for lots of brands. You know, the smell of fresh bread, for example, it smells really good, but quite often it reminds you of like your grandma when she used to make bread, or the bakery down the road, and it gives you that warm and fuzzy feeling. So then you want to buy bread. You know, it's the emotions are really important as well in branding, and how you want people to feel.
I think that's crucial in terms of you know, when people are looking to sell their home and they talk about bake some bread in the oven and make some fresh coffee and all of these kind of things that you're making, and those touch points that you're talking about in terms of, you know, that very first touch point is that curb appeal where you're outside and you're coming in, and that gradual, those touch points when you first get to the door. And I often think about in terms of cost control, because you know, we're always looking at, you know, how much we're spending, budgets, being able to manage a budget in terms of a project. For, you know, a construction project has a lot of moving parts and it can be quite expensive, and often you get to a point where you're looking at, okay, can we cut something back, and what do we need to protect? And so at literal touch points, I often would look at, okay, let's go for a lower price spec on the actual door. But for the door handle that you're actually touching, and you're going to actually have much more of that physical connection with, and it also has to move, so it has to be
right.
It has to be more robust. So spend your money on that bit, and save a bit more money on the door itself.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a really good point. And it's something which, you know, I always say to clients, they'll sort of have a limited budget sometimes, and it's like, well, let's focus on the most important things, and actually getting a professional to help you with that's really important. Because sometimes they'll say, oh, well, I'm going to buy, you know, for example, I'm going to buy a really fancy laptop for my virtual assistant's business. And I'm like, do you really need to spend £2,000 on the laptop? Or could you use some of that budget to actually, you know, build a really good website, or to do something that's going to generate you more revenue? Whereas the laptop is so fancy that it's almost too much for what they really need it for. So sometimes it's about balancing out what you think you need, and actually focusing on the real big impact things. So it makes total sense.
So I'd be really interested in, I know that you've done so much, and you've mentioned that you work with clients and you've helped them to translate their branding into the physical space. So I'd love to know, because I mean, my understanding of your background is from the graphic design, the digital and print side of things. So how is that, does that, you then translate that into the space?
Yeah, I mean, I've done everything from big exhibitions in, you know, like the NEC, in international, like the Messe Frankfurt and things like that, all the way through to museums and cafes and children's play areas and hotels. So it's kind of a case of, I work a lot with their sort of contractors. So I'll have the brand guidelines, whether that be, you know, in a booklet, or sometimes it's basically still in my head at that point because we haven't even got to that part, because things need to happen quite quickly with certain things. So it tends to be, you know, looking at how we can make the space memorable, how we can bring in like branding to the space. So for example, with the children's play area, it was important for the children to feel really engaged and happy, but it was also important for the parents not to feel absolutely overwhelmed by the amount of colour and pattern and things like that. So it's about thinking about all your users and all of your, you know, the people that are going to be in that space and how you want them to feel, because, you know, I could have easily made it the biggest colour vomit that you've ever seen, and it's really overwhelming and overstimulating. Because as well, some children that use that space have maybe sensory processing issues as well. So sometimes less is more for them, because they're already going to be quite overwhelmed when they get there, and all the noise and all of that stuff. So it really does depend on the space. And when it comes to things like hotels and spaces like that I've worked with, quite often with those, they usually have an interior designer that would kind of liaise with me about the brand guidelines and things like that. Because obviously there's like multi-space there, and I probably wouldn't be designing much other than maybe a menu or like a little door hanger that goes on the back of the door, you know, do not disturb. So it kind of depends on the space. I've done things like pattern design for like interiors as well. Just lots of thought about the space and who's going to be using it and what they want people to feel like when they're there. But I always use the example of the play area, just because there's so many users of that space, and you could have grandmas, you could have dads, you could have, you know, siblings bringing in their little brothers and sisters and things like that, and different ages of children. So that's a really good example of kind of the variety of people that could be using a space and how you've got to consider all of those as well. So yeah, and interestingly, one of the sort of weirdest places I've ever had to do, like, translate a brand to a space is the Pencil Museum in the Lake District. And, you know, how do you make the manufacturing of a pencil interesting? So it's one of those things where, you know, pencils come in lots of colours. We brought in a special character, this giant that would have a giant pencil that he would, you know, graffiti the walls with and things like that. So it was about bringing in sort of multi-tones to the brand that you wouldn't have really thought about, and really high on imagination and interactivity with all the users and things like that. So that was quite a weird one to do, but quite fun as well, because you can really play around with creativity and, you know, have a little bit of a joke as well, which is quite, you know, it's quite nice to sort of do spaces like that as well. So yeah, it just depends on the space at the end of the day and what it's used for and things, but there's so much you can do to bring in brand, you know, whether that's personal or, you know, a big corporate even, to a space. It's just the sky's the limit quite often. So yeah.
And the budget.
Yeah, the budget. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I am quite lucky that my clients usually have a good budget, and if they don't, then there's a lot that can be done to actually, you know, mitigate the costs. You know, sometimes less is more. Like, I helped a museum in the Lakes, and they really didn't have a big budget, so all we did really was just have a few patterns like stuck on the wall, and just brought in little elements that could identify it as that brand, but we didn't go crazy and change everything. So yeah, it does depend on the budget for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do quite a bit of restaurant interiors, and they're really fun because that's all about the experience, because otherwise you might as well eat at home or get a takeout.
Yeah.
So it's all about experience, how you get into it, how you get to your table, how you order, all of that.
Yeah.
Everything is about experience.
Yeah.
And the design of it. I did quite a few Turkish restaurants, so it was about how do you pick up that element of sort of that kind of sensation of being abroad, being somewhere else, being transported.
Yes.
And
yeah,
like those sort of, that they were really fun. I really enjoyed designing those.
Fun.
So what do you think is the as a sort of closing point in terms of how we should consider marrying up our home, like the space around us, all the things, that the visual stuff that we have in that space, how that reflects what we want to say about ourselves? What would you say is like the most important thing?
I think the most important thing is to not be afraid of showing your personality and the person you are first and foremost, because, going back to that authenticity side, if you're, creating a home that you think other people are going to like, but you don't like, then, who are you really doing it for? And I think that with the rise of social media and Instagram worthy houses and stuff, it comes back to really, thinking about who you are and what you want to put out into the world. I would probably recommend not thinking of taking any pictures to put on social media of your house, if that makes sense. Like, imagine that no one other than you and your friends and family was going to see your house, and what you would do then. Because if you start thinking about what the wide world wants, then you can fall into that trap of thinking, diluting yourself to please more people. So I always say that, don't be afraid to show your personality. Don't be afraid to, take risks with things, because at the end of the day, if you paint a wall and you don't like it, you can repaint it. It's not as if it's impossible to redo. So that's the first thing. And second of all, I would be kind of, the longevity thing. I personally think that's really important. First of all, I couldn't be bothered to redo my whole look of my kitchen or my bedroom or whatever every sort of year or two. Like, for me, I want my interiors to be sustainable and to last. But then if you've got the budget and you have the energy to redo your decor every couple of years, then go for it, because that's not up to me. That's up to the person who's doing it. So I think it's just about not being afraid of showing who you are and really embracing that, and not to follow the trends, just to do what you personally want and what's right for you and your family. And what's the last thing? Don't rush into things too quickly. I think do a bit of research, Pinterest board, make a mood board, for each room, each space, and how you want it to look. And then start buying things, and then start, bringing things in. I think that would be a good place to start as well. I know I've realized there was not one crucial point there. There's about 5, but I think that's kind of summing up what the main points would be. For sure.
That's brilliant, and I think you're right. I think a lot of homeowners that I work with, they can be afraid to stamp their own personality on their home to an extent, and that's where you end up with a lot of magnolia, isn't it? Where the concern is more about, well, when I sell, and now the people, how easy is it going to be to sell at the end of the day? And if you're planning to sell in a year's time, then perhaps that is something to consider. but at the same time, yeah, but if you're actually planning to live there for 5-10 years, you can always paint in magnolia just before you leave.
I mean, I just think that most things are reversible, so it's not as if you are kind of stuck with something, you know, for the long term. You can, you know, repaint things, and as long as it's nothing major, then yeah, paint is a really good example. You could really show your personality with paint and soft furnishings and things like that. I actually have a few friends that, and I do this a lot as well, I keep everything neutral wall wise so that I can kind of mix things up soft furnishings wise. So yeah, kind of things like that. And I guess nowadays people move a lot more than they used to for all sorts of reasons. So I do get that, but a happy medium would be to buy in the furnishings and the additional decor items that are removable, and then have the walls easily repainted and things like that as well. So there's always workarounds.
Yeah, for sure there is. There's always things you can do.
Yeah, always.
But it's a bit different when you're dealing with the kind of work that I do, which is more like, where's the wall going to go? Where's the door going to go? You can move a door, but and you can move a wall, but it's not as easy and it's not as low cost as
it's really interesting that, because quite often people will say to me, oh, you must be really good at like interior and stuff like that, and I'm like, not really, because I just don't have that spatial awareness to be like, yeah, that needs to go there and this feels right. Get me to pick colors and that's fine, but not yeah, I don't know how you do it, Jane, to be honest, because I have no spatial awareness. I'm just like, yeah, just cram it all in.
I think it's something you can learn, because you know, you go through quite a long process at university to learn about that, and you spend a lot of time measuring doors and measuring
yeah, no, that's not my thing. I don't measure stuff. I'm just like, yeah, just whatever.
Having that sort of physical understanding of space, like being able to visualize that the size of the space, and like even things like, I know that from the end of my thumb to the end of my little finger stretched out is about 20 centimeters. So having like little personal references to size that you can relate to it, and you can get that real like a more personal understanding of space and what that means and what you can fit in it, that really helps.
Yeah, that does make sense. I suppose it's a bit like someone saying to me like, oh, I couldn't design my own logo because I just don't know where to start, whereas quite often I know what I'm going to do before I even get to the drawing board. Like, I've already mapped it out in my head. So it's kind of the similar thing, isn't it, really, having those visual cues and whatnot. So yeah,
definitely. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Rebecca. It's been really interesting. I love all the touch points, the idea of the touch points and the idea of the different senses that, you know, bring into that experience of the space and the brand. Those are things I think could really be good takeaways. And I'd love to know, for those of you watching, what are your key takeaways from this conversation? What are you going to be thinking about applying to your space design? And if you run your own business, what are your key sort of values that your brand represents? Let us know in the comments. It'd be really interesting to know that. And thank you so much again, Rebecca.
You're very welcome.
Okay, bye now.
Yeah.